we'll reach out to her on Friday, if not tomorrow. Just inform her, say, hey, are you back? Are you definitely ill? Yeah, that's where we are. Like I said, not, I mean, I kind of lied because I knew that I didn't want to tell the truth. The voice wasn't right. But I knew if I said it's bad, that would be the scenario. It's bad, but it's not. How long have you been through this? I have no idea.
Well,
Should not.
I don't, you know, I'm getting paranoid and I'm paranoid, but really discouraged at what happened. I know it's really affecting our performance and.
Yeah, I mean, but that's where we are. No. No, but,
No,
the problem, the whole point of this past month was to be churning through the HR, so that we would actually be
Ready to go.
a little bit ahead. Yeah, but now we're.
No.
Yeah,
And then somehow, it's the.
not really, no, it's the same situation. Capacity. Okay, sure. Yeah. Anyway, I will go back to my car and get the remainder of the materials. We should be good to go. Your PowerPoint should be loaded up there like it was last week. So.
Oh, excellent. Thanks.
Hello, Rob, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Good to see you again. Your regular appearance at our meetings now. Huh.
This is a different group.
This is the policy committee made of political decision makers of the representative from the city council, then from the county and the county Mesilla and DOT.
Okay.
So most of them should be aware of it, but this is, maybe some aren't.
Yeah.
It's a reviewer session and also to check the box.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, they've been informed, yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But it's always good to review. Yeah.
Hi, we're well. How about you? Becky Graham, Becky Graham.
Yeah, we don't normally sit here, so I don't want to displace anyone.
We're up here somewhere. All right.
The center is usually for the chair, but other than that, take whatever seat you like.
So I would love to sit by you. Oh, well, we can take, we can take this and this, I guess.
Yeah.
So. controlling my own destiny.
Great. Great to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And only one person can speak at one time,
Okay.
so you can press your microphone and make sure it's not loud.
Okay, so only one mic can be on at one time. Okay.
Hello, I'm Andrew.
Nice to meet you. We've gotten emails from you, I gather.
Yes, yes.
Becky?
Very well. I need some help. We have, believe it, Counselor Quorums, is that how you pronounce
Yes,
his name?
yeah.
And then Counselor Graham.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Well, very nice to meet you both.
Great to meet
We actually have some gifts for you.
Wait, facetiously, like
No,
large
actual
binders?
literal-
Oh, okay, like actual gifts.
Yeah, we
Not
actually
that
have,
kind of
well, they're binders, but they are for you to keep forever.
Large binders of reading.
Yes, they are, but they are useful MPO-related materials. It's kind of our baseline documentation for consumption. We give them to all of our new members when they arrive.
Oh, it
As
has my
is
name on it. That
appropriate
feels
in the
I
design.
like this too, book of knowledge.
We will provide updates for them, although we kind of, partially to save paper over the course of
Yeah.
time, we kind of eliminated some of the things that kind of need to be updated on a really
Okay.
recurring basis. But as needed, there are things that change. Obviously, Councilor Graham has already opened hers, but the opening pages are going to change rapidly. In fact, we had to do a reprint this very morning for some of the materials. So that one is basically only going to be good for today. And then, but yeah, we will update kind of some of the substantive stuff as it goes forward. So, if you have any questions, please, as I said in the email, I'm always available for you guys. Yeah, we look forward to your participation on the policy committee.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, I'm honestly, not that I'm blaming him, but I'm presuming that that's something that happened to me. And I just never had the wherewithal to think through, we should change this. Help! All right, so, let's see, me,
Yeah, this chair.
me, Rob. So you're the one who's on vacation today. Well, actually, next month we may have Wayne, we may have Andy, we may have a really full
Please
agenda.
no.
We may. Honestly, I'd be surprised if that happens, because I'm sure that Wayne's gonna say, I'm not ready yet, but Andy is probably going to need to be ready with something. Yeah. Andy is probably going to need to be ready with something. Well, they actually, they're getting coming in a few days. So, yeah, we should, there's no reason we not ready for the February policy. I guess it depends on what the results of the final report are. If the results of the final report are, hopeful as well. But I don't think Andy's gonna take more of an answer. In some respects, yes, we're still in those days.
And I'll be,
Actually, no. I think we can.
oh,
And now he,
I will,
I'm not sure, but yes, of course I will, but I'm not sure that.
but I
Okay.
think
I need for that as like,
with integrity, not just being spiteful.
like,
I'll
we've already
take that.
been it, but I don't know.
Maybe a little bit of, I'll take that city that's in there, but I do give him credit for, appreciate it if, so if you have some materials to rather than last year, actually, right before I went on vacation. I have not had, I've actually been, I was on vacation for 2 weeks. I haven't been back. But if I'm given that task, then I will have motivation to remember between now and February, whatever it is. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Trent. I didn't do anything, but. Yeah, well, I appreciate your earnest of good faith.
How are you doing?
How are you doing?
You as well. Trustee Garcia can't make it.
I know, right?
I always see her like in spandex and like in the mountains, covered in dirt. I met you at the.
Yeah, election party.
I know, that's why, I don't,
Yeah, right.
I do not mind one bit.
Okay.
Maybe that's why Trustee Garcia,
Yeah, that honestly could be it.
You-
Although, for TAC last week, the person who wasn't there was elected chairman, so.
ah,
That was slightly.
hello, how are you, Trent?
Survived the new year, and you?
Ditto. Absolutely ditto. We've got rampant cases over at the detention center.
Hello. Good, how are you?
Hello,
Hello. Can I say whatever?
absolutely.
Trent, you're there?
Sit on the end because it's harder to throw.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Stephanie.
Hi, Becky Graham.
Becky?
And the other Becky.
Hi. I can't screw that up. Two Beckys.
Hi, how are you?
Okay.
Okay. All right, cool.
Oh, boy. There you go. Okay.
How's it going on your all-women?
Yeah, oops. Pretty good. Last night was, no, wait, what's today, the 12th? Monday night was our first meeting. So, yeah. It was nice. So, and the same for,
Clock is more active.
All our city council.
yeah, yeah.
How exciting, right?
I know.
Exciting time.
The,
Be in Las Cruces.
you know, Michael McDivitt had asked me what my thoughts were, and it truly caught me off guard, because to me, that's just, no, like, how do you feel about it? I think it's awesome. I mean, I didn't know what else.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, you know, he just kind of caught me off guard, because, I mean, it's an obvious question, but
Yeah.
I didn't know what else.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Didn't
It
wonder.
doesn't have to go further.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have access to the Wi-Fi?
What? What?
Do you have access
Yes.
I just went in under internal guests. Oh.
Yeah, you can log in as guest.
Yeah, and you put your email and hit accept. I'm sure we're breaking like 20 city cybersecurity rules, but.
Well, if you're on your city stuff, then yes, you probably are. Actually, it's not probably you are, but,
We're not on the record yet, right?
well, the mics are on, so in principle, but.
And this is 1 p.m. to 3 p.m.
That's the stated time. We better not go that long today. We usually won't. Sometimes we will go longer than 2 hours, particularly the November meeting, so just mark your calendars. November is usually bad for.
We both have a hard out for 3 today, but
Okay, yeah, we'll be done. We'll be done. Michael, talk fast.
I like these chairs, but
Well, I guess you're in control of the city budget.
Christine, I like these chairs. Can you make a note of that?
I'll see what I can do, but I need to see what they look like first. Is yours all the way up?
I don't know.
Okay, put it all the way up.
Oh, well, only if I get one too. It's the rule.
Except we're definitely shorties up here, so.
So then do that.
I'll get with facilities.
Okay, and now roll up there and see. There's something wrong with my torso to leg ratio, I swear to God. Because I have mine all the way up and I'm like swimming. I can't do that. What'd you think?
I'm writing it down.
Oh, like what kind of chairs these are?
Yeah, so I can ask facilities.
You have to test it out.
Happy New Year, sorry. I got my hands full.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Trustee Garcia.
Counselor? How you doing? Nice to see you guys again.
Trustee Garcia will not be here,
Okay,
just so you know.
so we'll, oh, there's
The mayor's
mayor's.
here.
Oh, then we can pass that over as well.
Mr. Chair, we do have quorum, and I am showing 1 o'clock, so at your leisure.
That's what I was confirming.
Oh, Michael, do we need the chair?
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm Nora.
I'm Becky from the city of Massachusetts.
Oh, Nice to meet you, Becky.
This is also Becky, she's from the area.
Two Beckys. Awesome.
All right, it's 1:01 PM on Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. Happy New Year to everybody. We'll call this meeting of the Mesilla Valley Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Committee to order. If we can, if you wouldn't mind, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And if we can get a roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mayor Barraza,
Here?
Councilor Corin,
Here.
Councilor Graham,
Here.
Trustee Johnson Burek,
Here.
Councilor Bencomo,
Here.
Mr. Doolittle,
Here.
Mr. Chair.
Present. All right, we do have a quorum. Thank you, Andrew. And so we'll move on to our third item on the agenda, which is election of officers. And before we start, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Andrew Ray for the record. The Mesilla Valley MPO has, and this is just for the benefit of our new members and to refresh the memory of everyone, the Mesilla Valley MPO has a standing precedent of rotating the chairship among the member jurisdictions on an annual basis. This is not a hard and fast rule. There's nothing written down anywhere, but it has been the past precedent that has been upheld most of the time by this committee, and staff does endorse this practice. We do think it's good for the health of the MPO as a whole. By the past rotation, it would be the turn of Diana County to hold the chair this year. I would like to point out that Commissioner Sanchez is technically the vice chair at this moment in time. The position of chair is vacant, as Councilor Vasquez was the chair last year in 2021. Diana County would have the chair this year according to the usual precedent, and then it would be the turn of the town of Mesilla this year to hold the vice chair. So that's my little blurb. Does anybody have any questions about this before we move on with nominations?
Andrew,
Yes, Madam Trustee.
I nominate Commissioner Manny Sanchez as chair for the MPO.
Mayor Barraza, second.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay, then, Andrew, if there's no other nominations, can we get a roll call then?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Councilor Corin,
Yes.
Councilor Graham,
Yes.
Trustee Johnson Burek,
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you are Mr. Chair. Congratulations.
Thank you to my fellow members. Appreciate that opportunity. Okay, then we'll move on to nominations.
Mr. Chair, we need a oh, sorry, my apologies. I'm sorry. I thought that you were moving on to the next item.
No, I was gonna, we're gonna move on for nominations for vice chair. So we'll open up the floor for nominations.
Okay, I'd like to nominate Trustee Johnson Burek.
Then I
Mayor
will
Barraza, second.
Thank you, Mayor Barraza. Thank you, Councilor Bencomo. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay. Andrew, will you call the roll on nomination of Trustee Johnson Burek as vice chair?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Councilor Corin,
Yes.
Councilor Graham,
Yes.
Trustee Johnson Burek,
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, we have a vice chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Johnson Burek. Appreciate you serving again. All right, so now we're on to, so we have a vice chair and a chair now. So we'll move on to our conflict of interest inquiry. Does any member of the committee have any known or perceived conflict of interest with any item on the agenda? If you can say yes or a quick no, I appreciate it.
None.
None?
None.
Great, thank you. All right, very good. Then we'll move on to public comment. Remember, Mr. Pearson, come on up.
My name is George Pearson. I am presently the chair of your Bicycle Pedestrian Facilities Advisory Committee, but I'm speaking here on my own behalf today. I want to thank you all for your participation in this. Years past, we couldn't come to a quorum because members were missing. So this has been good progress, and this committee does important work. Among that work is designating and funding roadway facilities, both planning and as part of the process of the funding process. Something that I would hope that you would consider is the safety of those projects that are being recommended. Just as a recap, the statewide fatalities numbers have been released. And this year we had 470 deaths on the roads in New Mexico, or last year, 2021, which amounted to an 18% increase from 2020, which was a decrease because of the pandemic, but still a 10% increase from 2019. In the county, we've been much more fortunate with only 16 deaths last year on the roadways. So hopefully we can keep that trend going. I know Mr. Doolittle looks at safety as a primary concern, and I hope that you encourage him to continue doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Are there any other public comments at this time? Okay. All right, we're on to the approval of the agenda. If I can get a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Barraza makes that motion.
Thank you, Mayor Barraza.
Second, trustee Johnson Burek.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second for the approval of the agenda. Is there any input on the agenda before we vote? Okay, hearing none, can I get a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Councillor Corwin,
Yes.
Councillor Graham,
Yes.
Trustee Johnson Burek,
Yes.
Councillor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Okay, we have our agenda. So on to the approval of the minutes. These are the minutes from the meeting on December 8th, 2021. If I can get a motion and a second for approval.
So moved, trustee Johnson Burek.
Mayor Barraza, second.
Okay, we have a motion that's from Vice Chair Johnson Burek and seconded by Mayor Barraza. Are there is any input on the meeting minutes from December 8th of 2021?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Doolittle.
I know it may seem minute, but I just want to bring up a correction, if you would, on page 18, line number 16. I had mentioned that La Calarita was our contractor, and if you participated on our public meeting, I think everybody that was there butchered Toby's contractor's name. It should be spelled Calarita. If we could make that correction. I know it seems small, but I want to make sure Toby's recognized appropriately. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. So if we can make a note of that and we can update the minutes, being that it's just a more administrative change, I don't think we need to have an amendment for that. All right, are there any other input on the meeting minutes? Okay, very good. Then can we get a roll call on the meeting minutes, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Councillor Corwin,
I abstain as I wasn't at the meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Graham,
I abstain as well.
Trustee Johnson Burek,
Yes.
Councillor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the minutes pass.
Very good. Okay, we're on to action items. It's agenda number 8.1, which is resolution 22-01. It's a resolution certifying compliance with the Open Meetings Act for calendar year 2022 by the Mesilla Valley MPO. Before we begin discussion, if I can get a motion and a second on this item.
So moved, trustee Johnson Burek.
Moved by Vice Chair
Second. Bencomo.
and seconded by Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Andrew Ray for the record. The adoption of the Open Meetings Act compliance resolution certifies that this MPO will conduct itself in all of its business by the policy committee and the advisory committees in compliance with the State of New Mexico Open Meetings Act. This is a requirement that we self-certify this every year, and it's always the first resolution that we do every calendar year at the January or the February meeting, whichever happens to come first. It is sort of an annual ritual, but it is an important one that we do, and that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Ray. Are there any questions on the resolution 22-01? Okay, not seeing any. We if you wouldn't mind calling the roll on this one, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mayor Barraza,
Yes.
Counselor Corrin,
Yes.
Counselor Graham,
Yes.
Trustee Johnson Burek,
Yes.
Counselor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Okay, we're on to our discussion items, beginning with 9.1, which is the Open Meetings Act training.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Andrew Ray for the record again, and it may seem a little backwards, and actually next year we're going to change the format of how we deal with the Open Meetings Act. But we're now going to explain to you what it is that you just voted to approve. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Mr. Rob Cabello from the City of Las Cruces legal staff who will give this presentation.
Hi, I'm Robert Cabello, Deputy City Attorney, and I'm here to do a presentation on the Open Meetings Act and why it's important. Essentially, the Open Meetings Act, and I got accused by another attorney about this, that it was a technical rule or I was using it as a technical rule. In reality, it is how government is done. But why it's important? A couple things. First off, even though there's a presumption in the Open Meetings Act under 10.15.2 that essentially that anything that's done by government is presumed that we're following the Open Meetings Act. However, if there's proof that we're not following the Open Meetings Act, our action becomes invalid. So that's the first important thing. Actions that are taken when we're not following the Open Meetings Act is invalid. 2, it's under 10.15.4. It's a petty misdemeanor. It's a crime. And so it's important to think about those things. Now, the reality is that, one, the DA here is really busy. It's unlikely they would actually do a prosecution. The Attorney General is also very busy. I can't imagine they would do a prosecution for an Open Meetings Act violation, but it could happen. It's a possibility. It's something to think about. So, the Open Meetings Act, it's part of the Sunshine Laws. Essentially, it is what makes government transparent. It is so people, it essentially with the Open Meetings Act, along with the Inspection of Public Records Act, that statute that allows the public and individuals to request documents, public documents from the government agencies. That's one of those things where it allows people to see and participate in their government intelligently. So what does the Open Meetings Act require? Essentially, whenever there's a quorum of a governing body, a commission, a board, a policymaking group, an adjudicatory body, essentially, whenever there's a sort of public meeting, it essentially there has to be in public. And one, that means there has to be an agenda. But first off, what's required? Whenever there's a meeting and whenever that sort of body is making public policy. So in the terms of city council, whenever they have a work session, they're not voting on an action item. They're not making a decision that day. They're talking about the direction they want either the city administration to go, or they're talking about policies they're interested in, or whatever they're talking about. Whenever they're developing personnel rules, regulations, ordinances, a discussion of public business, and of course, and this should be obvious, whenever the board is making a decision under their authority, whatever that is. So what does it really mean? As far as whenever the public policy recommendations are being made to the public, it obviously has to comply with the Open Meetings Act. What it really requires is that whenever there's deliberations, there can't be secret discussions. So whenever there is public policy going on, board members, committee members can't be sending text messages to each other, emails. All those deliberations for or against something, or even some sort of nuanced position between those two, has to be done for the public. It's the whole purpose. Otherwise, you would defeat the purpose of the Open Meetings Act. Literally, you could have discussions, and the public themselves couldn't hold their own elected or appointed officials to account because they really wouldn't know what the basis of those discussions. So, some things to think about. The public can record public meetings. Obviously, the media records commission meetings for the Board of County Commissioners. They also record city council meetings, but the public can come and do that. Something to think about. What's not required, and people sometimes confuse this, it's not required that the public gets to speak. The only thing that's required under the Open Meetings Act is that the public gets to hear and listen and what's going on, how that decision's being made by their government. Now, this is a slightly different issue, but I'll say this, and it's really not part of the Open Meetings Act. If you're gonna allow people to speak, you should let everyone speak, not just select certain people. And so you can limit that time. Like if you have a lot of people, a real controversial issue, and you have 1,000 people here. I mean, you can limit it to about a minute or 2 minutes, their comment. I mean, as long as it's fair, you can't just let one person speak and then maybe a bunch of other people that are maybe for or against the position not speak. So that's just my advice to you, that if you're going to do that, let them speak. You can limit that time, but be fair to how you do that. Also, if the body is an adjudicatory body, a slightly different issue of due process. Obviously, if, example, planning and zoning issues, sometimes they're on appeal. That issue, the witnesses' statements were taken under oath. Obviously, witnesses get to testify. That's a slightly different type of thing that's really not covered by the Open Meetings Act. Okay, so what's required? Obviously, it's not just public attendance, but what's required is that the public minutes of the meetings there must be minutes. And the minutes don't need to be verbatim, but there must be enough substance to those minutes so people can understand what's being discussed, the proposals, and of course, what's important is the vote. Who voted for what? That's why you can't have just general ayes for a proposition. You have to have roll call. A roll call so people, the voters, public can understand how people voted. Okay, so what's important here is that there has to be 72 hours notice for the agenda posted. That means, and then what's required for that agenda is to have substantial enough information so that the average person can read that and understand what's being discussed. So it can't be, if it's so general, it's, well, government stuff, sarcastically. I mean, obviously that doesn't really help. But, you know, if you have an idea, well, we're deciding on a contract with a certain company for construction of a new school. Well, that makes sense. And so what's also important is only items on the agenda can be discussed. Now, realistically, when we're talking about government and subjects, a lot of things are interconnected, intertwined. And so, yes, sometimes a topic will go over another topic, but we must sort of, hopefully the parliamentarian or the chair can control that, you know, these other like tertiary or tangentially related topics don't just become the main discussion. We bring this discussion back to what's on the agenda. Because when we start talking about that other agenda, it wasn't posted, again, we might be in violation of the Open Meetings Act. Okay, so I kind of covered this already. So what's required for the minutes? Date, time, and place of meeting. So obviously for, you know, public needs to know where these meetings were held, who was there, names of the members in attendance, being the board members of the quorum. Minutes are open to the Inspection of Public Records Act, so people get obviously it's a public record. One of those things is that one of the requirements is that we have to have draft minutes, not the final minutes that are approved as we did earlier, but we have to have draft minutes within 10 working days after the board meeting. So, rolling quorums, this is very important. Kind of spoke about this somewhat earlier about our secret discussions with our cell phones and text messages. So, whenever we have a quorum, it's not just whenever we're here in chambers. It could be any time. And a rolling quorum is essentially when, say, 2 board members have a discussion in person, then call a third board member to get their position, and text a fourth one, and maybe send an email to a fifth and a sixth. The point is, you're developing you're deliberating, having a discussion outside the public view. All that development of that deliberation, that discussion has to be done in public. Again, otherwise, if you were allow that sort of loophole, there'd be no point to having this. You could just have these meetings, you literally just sit there, not have a discussion, make a vote. Meetings would be done pretty quick, but then the public would be cheated out of knowing how those deliberations were reached. Okay, so this is case law. You can read it, and I always at this point, I always tell people, and people think I sometimes go far with this, but I want people to think about the opposite of democracy, like North Korea, right? And authoritarian governments, and this is very serious. Those governments don't work just by secret police and the military. Obviously, those are big parts of that type of government regime. But those governments are opaque. Even the simplest discussions, decisions occur in the privacy of rooms, phone calls. And what happens is that behind those regimes, you have families who are connected politically to religious institutions, industrial institutions, right? They just own a lot of land. And those family members tend to have positions in government. I mean, they're supported by something. You have to pay soldiers to do things. And so contracts go, there's never a debate. There's no sort of decision as, well, is this a good contract or not? It's corruption. It's all opaque. And reality is those governments are supported by opaque process. And not all political prisoners are people that are just protesting the government itself. Sometimes it's just an issue about a neighborhood issue. It upsets someone in power over how they're being policed, or about how maybe their friend didn't get a job or they lost a job. Again, it's corruption. And so those things, again, because it happens all in the dark, and all decisions happen in the dark. And that's why all these transparency laws, sunshine laws, are so important to follow. Something to think about. So with that, any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding the presentation? No.
I do have a question.
Oh, thank you, Mayor
Mr. Chair.
Barraza. Please.
Okay. My question is, we receive correspondence from a constituent, and it goes to all members on the board. And it has to do with an item that's an agenda item for our council meeting. One of the counselors responds to it, but it goes to everyone. Is that a violation of the Open Meetings Act?
No, Chair, Commissioner, I'm sorry.
Mayor Barraza.
I'm sorry, Mayor Massa. It is not. So if you're sharing it with everyone, if there's no discussion about it, if there becomes a discussion about what this constituent's talking about regarding their agenda item, whatever it is, that's when it becomes a violation. If it's just the sharing of this, you got a public comment, it's not.
Okay. So, but if one of the counselors responds to it saying, no, I support you on your comments that you've made here on this agenda item, I'm going to, support it. Is that in violation? It sounds like it would be, but I just want to make sure.
So, Chair, Mayor Massa, if the comment is this comment just to the constituent, or is it to everybody saying we should all vote for this, or what is this?
Yeah, I would like you to support, the agenda item or vote against this agenda item that's coming up on your board packet on Monday's meeting. And I would ask that you please support or deny this. And then one of the trustees, in our council, it's trustees.
Yeah.
One of the trustees responds back and says, I am not in support of this item, so I will not be supporting or voting in favor of this agenda item. And it goes out to everyone. Is that considered to be a violation?
Chair, Mayor Massa, that is a clear violation. If it's a discussion with just a constituent, I'm support this position, it's one thing. If you're now sort of trying to gain support or for or against the position, then it definitely is, you're now addressing the quorum, you're having the deliberation through via email. I mean, there's maybe some abilities we can cure that if it is an issue. But it's something that we shouldn't practice that, because again, it becomes an open meetings act violation.
Okay, I thought so, but I just wanted
No
to hear
problem.
it from someone else. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Barraza. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, it doesn't sound like any, so I appreciate all your, the time and educating us on the Open Meetings Act.
Appreciate it, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, we're on to agenda item 9.2, the first mile, last mile presentation. Dr. McAdams.
Thank you very much, and a welcome to all the board members and new ones too. The first mile, last mile is very appropriate because two things have happened. The 5-year plan for road and transit, short-term transit plan has been adopted, and also the SCRTD 10-year plan, our mid-year plan, has been adopted too. So this is very apropos to this topic. Basically, if you look at what is the premise of first mile, last mile, it's quite simple. How do you get to the bus stop? Is that by walking, biking, even car, if you have a park and ride situation, and then the bus stop itself, what the quality of the bus stop, and then how do you get to your destination? Is it again by walking, biking, etc.? And we'll talk about some of the elements, but what is really the quality of walking and biking and other modes, motorized vehicles, or even wheelchairs modes to these bus stops? Now, will it be easy? This is a question. Will it be an easy trip to the bus stop at my origin and my destination and return? The concept or construct of the first mile, last mile analysis is the factors related to the trips of existing or potential transit passengers from their origin to the destination and return. The journey to access public transit could be by various means: walking, biking, wheelchairs, motorized conveyance, scooters, for you've seen those for those who are disabled, and by motorized vehicle. Now, the quality of facilities to and from a bus stop could be an asset for existing and potential bus riders.
And Dr. McAdams, if you can hold on for 1 second, I just want to see on the board, I know I'm right in front of Dr. McAdams, so I can hear him, but I don't know if everyone across the board can understand.
Mr. Chair, it's just a little echoey.
Okay, it is. I don't know what, is it still doing it?
Yeah, I think it's just the nature of the acoustics in the room.
It is. There's a place at City Hall you can actually hear the echo too.
Yeah, and I think that's I guess the one thing about the City Hall microphone system is I think when it's off, you have the speaker that's right in front of you, so you get that
Okay,
direct.
well, I try to get as close as possible with the help, I guess.
Okay.
The elements of first mile, last mile is the modes of travel, which would be, again, could be wheelchair, a motorized conveyance, walking, could be bicycling, or it could be by microtransit. That's one of the key factors of the short transit plan for Roadrunner. And then how do you get there? You get by sidewalks, cycle paths, roads, or you go through interchanges to get to the bus stop. And we'll talk later about the bus stop qualities. And then your destination, our origin destination, is your home. It could be not your origin, but it could be something else, or your destination. Office, medical, etc., shopping. So what are bus stop characteristics? Now, bus stops create a refuge for those waiting for a bus and departing for a destination. Is there a shelter with inclement weather and for shade? Does the bus stop have amenities such as bus schedules, lighting, security cameras, trash cans, etc.? And at this point, I'd like to tell that I, in cooperation with Roadrunner, have developed a bus stop inventory GIS. So it's a spatial analysis and database which helps us keep track of as minute things as when the benches have been painted, the bus shelters painted, and what they have. So we know exactly, well, we have to update it often, but we know to a certain degree how what attributes are at bus stops. Is there accommodation for those for mobility difficulties? Now, a quarter mile is considered the ideal distance for waiting to a bus stop. And it's a general rule, but it could be longer. But the bus stop located along its a connecting sidewalk, how wide is the sidewalk? Are there any physical barriers that reduce sidewalk width? Are there any objects that stick out and are blocking the sidewalk? Now, here's some examples of bus shelters. Now, here's one at University Avenue at Whataburger. This is one that I know that many in the bicycle community and in the transit community don't like either. There is no sidewalks to Whataburger. And the bike lanes are sort of not very well marked either. So that's one thing. We don't put bus stops where there's no sidewalks, yeah? And so if you have a wheelchair, it's too bad. So this is one thing we would like to see changed. Now here is another bus stop, which is basically not accessible. It's right across from Taco Bell. And that North Main is a bad road anyway, but you can see that there's no sidewalk, and the space is very narrow, there's no shelter. Now here's examples of good bus shelter, and this is right here in front of us. And this serves not only Roadrunner, but SCRTD as well. And you see there, at this site, you have a trash can, you have shade, you have schedules, you have bike rack. So this is and a sidewalk. This is a good example of a good bus stop. But we can't always do this, okay? Now, if you look at bicycle access, 1.5 miles is considered the bicycle shed for a bus stop. Is the bus stop located along a bike lane or a cycle path? And what is the quality of the bicycle facility that connect to bus stops? Are there bicycle facilities at the bus stop or at the destination? Does the bus have bike storage or sufficient bike storage? Now, one thing that all Roadrunners, and I think there's a lot of SCRTD buses, have bike racks. Some have 2 bike racks, some have 3. The problem is they often get filled up, so it's good to have a bike rack at the bus stop, if possible. And it's a good idea to have bike racks at businesses where bicycles are going to. Now, a quarter mile could be, or less, could be considered an ideal distance for those who use wheelchairs or other motorized mobility devices. Are there ADA accommodations at intersections? Are the sidewalks of sufficient width for wheelchairs and mobility devices? Are there paths but bus stops or shelters sufficient width to accommodate wheelchairs or mobility devices? Are there sidewalks at the destination to accommodate wheelchairs or mobility devices? So, and one thing always important to us is equity in transportation. And public transportation serves really a diverse group of people. It was from the senior citizens to people who are disabled to school children to a variety of different groups. Working people need buses too. So poor access to stops can adversely affect these with limited incomes to depend on bus service for mobility. Other aspects, quality of transit service, such as frequency, hours of service, destination, et cetera, can be important for areas with those of low income and mobility challenges. Online route maps, printed maps, and applications such as Google Transit could be assets in making a trek easier for all groups. Now, I did a little analysis of some of the local situations, and this map shows those that are low income, what areas that are below poverty, and you see that the bus system, the Roadrunner and SCRD serve these areas quite well. The problem is, do these areas have good access to sidewalks? Sometimes we have sidewalks that are really quite narrow that mobility devices cannot get on. Are there other facilities, there are other barriers like intersections that are very dangerous to cross as well. So, and a lot of these areas, also the center of town is where we also have people that are senior citizens a lot of times, and they often have trouble crossing intersections to get to bus stops. Here's looking at bus facilities and Roadrunner bus stops. Now, in this situation, many people who use transit for Roadrunner, at the last stop of the route, they often come by bike to this facility. So some of them don't have a good bike facility. So having a bike facility to meet, go to a bus stop is very essential. If the racks are full, they can always put it in a bus rack. If there's a facility, that location, and when they get to their destination, they can use hopefully a bike lane or multi-use path. And then when you get to there, they can also have a bike rack at the shopping or whatever facilities. Many do, but I think we'd like to encourage more. If you look at SCRD, who I said recently completed their, excuse me, I'm going to jump ahead, excuse me. This is the SCRTD approved return. You'll notice that one thing is different in this map from the regular route map, if you've seen it, is that one of the new aspects of this plan is microtransit. And we'll hopefully be talking in the future about what microtransit is. Microtransit is basically public Uber. So it will, if you get you can go on your app just like Uber, and you say, I want to go so-and-so at a time, I want to go to this destination. And in this situation, if you're within the microtransit zone, it will deliver that destination. If it was not, it will deliver you to either a key spots, mostly senior citizen center, or to another bus stop. So we hope within 15 minutes, same Uber concept, we'll pick up, there's a thing called Uber X, or Uber, it's like pool Uber. That's what it is. We'll pick up multiple passengers and deliver them to various destinations. This is we think it's going to be a very effective service for areas that are low density and have had poor ridership in the past. It's an experiment, a pilot project, probably going on in the next 6 months with a firm that I've been working and Roadrunner has been working with to do an app. So it's really the app they'll use existing vans, they use for ADA and senior citizens. I hope we can make it more efficient. And SCRD is also considering microtransit too. The remainder of the bus routes we hope to have more frequency, but the microtransit will eliminate perhaps a lot of walking. If you have a disability, you'll still be picked up at door to door by a van as well. We hope to talk more about this. I think it's a really exciting concept. Now, here is SCRTD. I brushed ahead a little bit, but you can see that, oh crap, what is this? Well, that's the same thing. Oh, I'm jumping ahead. I got my order. I have to do a little entertainment here, you know. And so I'm trying to make it too fast. And what is this? And one of the things in the short transit plan, which the MPO is involved directly, and I've supplied them the data too. And we looked at the characteristics of bus stops and multiple characters, like things like we put them, there's a score. So if there's a bus shelter, it gets a 1. If there's a bus rack, trash cans, lighting, etc., the more good quality you have, the more points you get, right? Real simple concept. And if you have less, of course, that sends a red flag up. In this situation, a red dot, right? So these indicate what bus stops should be improved. And there's many, so Roadrunner can't do all of them at once. So this is an incremental process. We can't solve all the problems we have with access to first mile, last mile in an instant. Now we have it. And so SCRD is it's only online as long as I've been here, almost 7 years it actually started. And Mayor Barraza was a very important part in SCRD too, in its establishment and reestablishment. So it's now a robust system. It's not experimental anymore. And so you can see that their bus stops are sometimes mirroring the bus stops of Roadrunner. They share the bus stop. But in other situations, they are in rural areas or small communities. Now, often these small communities like Vado and Del Cerro have maybe no sidewalks, no bike facilities. So actually facilitating this could actually help people to get to the bus stops. We know that's a problem, and we know these people in this area, some are quite low income and need assistance. Before, people used to they would have to pay, sometimes really a lot of money, to get to medical situation. With this, they don't. And so now we can say it's a robust system that's going to continue and sustain it. In conclusion, the first mile, last mile involves not only the physical elements of persons' trips to and from the bus stops, but issues of equity. Are they in areas where they can be accessible by people that need them? And the bus stop characters are the most crucial element in the first mile, last mile analysis, right? Is there a shelter? We said, is there just a dirt path? You know, if you have a wheelchair or mobility device, can you get off there? And so really that's a really important aspect. The analysis in a simple concept, because I like simplicity and complexity, is a simple concept but complex to address, as you can see. The Roadrunner Shortage Plan recognizes many of the deficiencies related to first mile, last mile. The City of Las Cruces Active Transportation Plan and the Mesilla Valley MPO Mobility 2045 address some of these issues. Microtransit has potential to expand service of fixed route. First mile, last mile analysis and implementation of numerous projects by Roadrunner, SCRDD, and member districts is crucial for equity and promoting transit use. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. McAdams.
Thank you.
Are there any questions on the policy committee?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Councilor Bencomo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. I just have one question around the more problematic bus stops. If you have a list of those around the city, easily accessible, that you could share with us.
Chairman, Councilor Bencomo, there's a big inventory for that.
Yes.
I'm not sure how, I'll be glad to send you the inventory list, but I'm not sure, and you can see that too, but I'm not sure how we can provide, that's what we have to work with in implementation, about how we go back to implementing improvements to the bus stops. It's almost like it's nothing we can do overnight, as said. It's a very detailed, almost excruciating situation to get bus stops. It's very incremental. It happens really slowly over time. But I'd be glad to see the list. I'm not sure, would you like a spreadsheet or?
Do you have it organized in a way that says good, bad?
Yeah, with that amenity, but it's kind of like there's a scoring system. So we have the scoring system and then like the high scoring system. I'll be glad to share that with you and explain that. And we work with Mike Bartholomew and Richard Hanwell. So I'd be glad to help you with that.
Yeah, thank you. We just had a work session. Actually, we just passed
We did.
an ordinance to improve our bus system. And something I mentioned in that work session was sort of the vicious cycle around public transit. And if we don't provide good quality service, we'll have less ridership, so then we'll invest less in public transit, and it's just this vicious cycle. And I want to make sure, some of those pictures that you showed were frankly really frustrating about, like, who thought to put this bench on this rocky area next to this pole where there's no sidewalk? And so I think those are just honestly really critical areas that we should be looking at, and whatever best we can do that through this body that can go back to our designated bodies around improving some of these bus stops. I think we need to do that.
Yeah, no. Councilor Bencomo, are we good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good. Councilor Crane?
I also just wanted to thank you so much for this presentation. It was really illustrative. And I think, to me, I was just thinking about sort of what Councilor Bencomo was saying, but right now, today is the first day back at school for all the students at MSU and DACC. And I feel like the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, much of what faculty in particular would say about addressing student accessibility in their classes and making sure that there was universal design and accessibility, we would say, oh, it's incremental, it's very difficult, we don't have the money for it. And then the pandemic happened and suddenly we had the money and figured everything out in like 6 months, miraculously. And so I guess I would say, I wonder if, and I understand that it's complicated, and I know it's only like my first week on the job here, but I do wonder if there's a bit of an inflection opportunity to say, you know what, we're in an infrastructure moment. Perhaps we can say, let's not be incremental about this. Let's really prioritize equity and access in our transportation. And so I'm sure data dramatically supports that need. And so I think I would like to see us think about how we can take those actions to really think about that. And so the inventory would be really helpful, especially as we move through the transportation committee within the city. At least I think we have a lot of opportunities to do that. So thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor, for those comments. Are there any other comments, questions? Okay, very good. Thank you, Dr. McAdams.
Thank you, too.
All right, we're on to agenda item 9.3, our NMDOT update. Mr. Doolittle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick update on some of our projects. We do have a few outside of this MPO area that we continue to work on. If you've been on I-25 up towards Hatch, we're still working on that reconstruction stuff to get rid of we call it the Rincon Rapids because it just moves around a lot. But we're almost ready to switch traffic to the new section of road and start on the southbound lanes. I-10 and 404, we started the demolition on the second existing bridge. We continue to see pretty good progress on that project, but we've had closures at night for the last 8 days or so. It's been problematic with all the I-10 traffic, but we should be finished with that demo by tomorrow night. Just want to briefly touch on a project that we have coming up, I-25 Mpo 14, which is in the Radium Springs area. We're going to do pavement preservation. We bid that project in November. I expect that we'll probably have a contract in January or so. We should see construction probably in early spring. It shouldn't take them too terribly long to get that done. But that's, if you've been out there, the road is it's not real rough, but it's loud because the pavement ceiling is starting to come off. But that was a pavement preservation we put in. It's a redistribution, so it's additional funding that came to the district, which is good. And then the other one I wanted to touch on is the I-25 corridor study. The chair and I participated in a meeting in Doña Ana on Saturday. We're nearing the end of the phase AB. The department does have the draft of that study. And for those of you that aren't aware, that study is basically on I-25 from the Loman interchange to Doña Ana. It includes the interchange at Doña Ana itself, and then it includes Thorpe Road from I-25 into town, I think to Doña Ana Road. So the department is currently reviewing the draft report. There's some things that we have I've got some concerns about some additional analysis they need to do. I would expect that we'll start to have public meetings in the next 4 to 8 weeks or so. But I'll be sure to keep you all informed, and I'll work with Andrew to make sure that we get the press releases out for those public meetings. That's really all I have on the projects. I do want to talk a little bit about some additional funding in this upcoming legislative session that starts on Tuesday. During the special session, the department through House Bill 2 received an additional $142.5 million for various projects. That sounds like a lot, but the projects that were listed on that House Bill 2 accounted for $2 billion worth of work. Luckily for District 1, we got $40 million to extend St. Francis Drive down in southern Doña Ana County, which basically goes from the Santa Teresa port of entry over the railroad tracks into Sunland Park on New Mexico 273. That $40 million should fully fund that project. It'll be an alternative access for freight and pedestrian traffic into Sunland Park and access to I-10. And then the other one, it's outside of this area, but I want you all to be aware, is we received $25 million to start our roadway improvements on US 180, basically from Baird to Deming.
That's one that was part of Governor Richardson's investment partnership program many years ago that wasn't funded. So we finally got enough money to do phase 1 and 2. And then in general, I just want to talk about some other things. House Bill 2 gave the department $10 million for EV charging stations statewide, so we're working on a plan for that. Provided $10 million for airports, and then the one that'll affect the district the most out of that is the $10 million for beautification and litter. For those of you in this area, we all recognize, I think, that we have big problems with litter. So that $10 million, we have a price agreement, a contractor that's coming on board, so we're going to put part of that money towards them, but they're also looking at funding some additional positions for the district that will do nothing but focus on litter, graffiti removal, those kinds of things. So that $10 million will help a lot with that. At this upcoming legislative session, there's discussion through Legislative Finance Committee that we'll probably get around $200 million for major investment projects. The good news for you all is that it will include about $80 million for local government road fund. So I encourage you to get with your staff, start prioritizing, getting your projects ready. It can be for any phase, whether it be design or construction, but $80 million for our local governments is another big shot in the arm. So make sure you all are ready for that. That money should probably be loaded probably the middle of July. I don't know what the criteria is. That's all managed out of Santa Fe, but just giving you all basically a 6-month head start on everybody else. We're going to have $20 million for rest areas, an additional $5 million for airports. They gave us some money for equipment, which we desperately need. And then we're also getting between $15 and $20 million for some major maintenance projects through price agreements. And then the other thing the secretary mentioned is as of 2025, the department will begin to pay off a substantial amount of our debt from some previous bonding programs that we went through, which will give the department an additional $100 million per year. I share this all with you because we typically manage as a district, we get about $30 million a year for our federal program. Right now, we're under contract for about $270 million, and that's on top of this funding that the secretary mentioned to us. And he shared with us that this is going to be the norm. This is no longer just shot in the arm money. It is going to be recurring revenue. So for you all, again, the local government program, get with your staff, make sure your things are in order, work with Andrew to make sure they're on our plans, that we're following his process. It's good times. There's a lot of money, and we're going to see a huge amount of infrastructure improvements. But if there's anything that I can do to help you all out, if you have projects that you think we need to work on, I know that you had just brought up some comments about some bus stops and those kinds of things. One of them that was on there was on US 70. We already have a project in the STIP that will widen that to 6 lanes, do some improvements, tie in those sidewalks. But those kinds of things as we move forward, if you have projects, now's the time to ask. I also encourage you as we have these studies, for instance, on the I-25 corridor study, it's going to be a very diverse group. We're going to have the commuters who are coming into town from US 70, for instance. But there's a lot of concern specifically in Thorpe Road. Make sure your constituents and your citizens are participating in these public meetings. We need to capture their comments before the fact, not after, because it becomes difficult to assure compliance with federal highway money and those kinds of things. With that, Mr. Chair, I don't think I have anything, but I'm certainly open to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Doolittle. Councilor McComb?
Thank you so much, Mr. Doolittle, for that update. Could you perhaps through Andrew send us an email about that local government monies, just sort of explaining that way when I go talk to staff about it? I sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Mr. Chair, councilors, I'll certainly work with Andrew right now. That $80 million is projected for this coming LFC session. So as soon as we have criteria, as soon as we find out how much money we have, all of that will absolutely be distributed through Andrew.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Doolittle?
Mr. Chair?
Mayor Barraza?
I do. Trent, it's great to hear that there's money and the LGRF. I'm excited about that because this past year we didn't get any of the LGRF money, but University Avenue, do we have enough money in that project? Or are you having to tap into some of this money to complete that project?
Mr. Chair, Mayor, the reason you didn't get any local government money is because I spent all your money on that project.
There was no doubt in my mind, Trent.
No, Mayor, we, as you're aware, we continue to have some final design changes and modifications for the drainage and some of those things. That project is funded. That's been my commitment to you and to the community to make sure that the kids along that corridor are safe. As the project has gone up, we've been moving some money around. The good thing is with this additional funding, so for instance, I'll just give you an example. Our projects have seen between a 20 and a 30% increase in the past 18 to 24 months. So a lot of this money is going to cover those kinds of shortfalls, not necessarily add projects to our list. But I'm still committed, Mayor, to making sure that that project is fully funded. And actually, we really can't move forward without design until we adjust that funding. But we will find a way to make sure it's ready to go.
Thank you so much, Trent. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor. Trent, I just want to say again, thank you for coming out to Doña Ana and helping provide some updates. I know there's always been that A to B study, particularly in Doña Ana, has been a topic that has always come up consistently over the last couple of years, and I understand the delays that have happened because of COVID. So, but really appreciate you coming out. I think it's gave the community something to look forward to in terms of at least how do they get involved in getting some input, and so that way they are aware. We'll be looking for those opportunities. So I really appreciate your help with that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think that's it for the DOT update. So move on to our committee members update. Are there any updates from committee members? I'll start by saying welcome to our new members. So appreciate you coming in. I know if you haven't already, between Dr. McAdams, Mr. Ray, and Mr. Loya, they are a wealth of knowledge. And Councilor Coran, I absolutely appreciate your comments on public input and, public transportation and how we can think outside the box and make bigger changes. So, but you know, I guess in the meantime, if there are any questions, like I said, please reach out to them. They'll, you know, I know they've helped educate me on the time that I've been on the MPO. And then really quickly, for our upcoming meeting in February, one item that we've, for those on the MPO and for our new members, one of the things that we do is we develop our targets every year for our local area from data that's 2 years old. We're always in arrears 2 years. And one of the things that it seems, and I know, is that we're always so far behind. And so one of the things I would like to look at is having possibly a resolution that we can possibly look to support, or at least for consideration by this committee, to gain support or ask the state in how we reduce that time frame, going from 2 years to something more immediate, and how, you know, so that way we can show that there's support to really kind of hopefully have some changes in how we're taking data, how we look at the crashes, accidents, any type of fatalities that are more readily available, so that we can start identifying where we have issues in the communities that we support and see how we can maybe make some changes within our various jurisdictions. So I don't know, like I said, I'd like to see that come forward and at least have that for the MPO. I don't know if there's any objection or at least any other comments on that from the members. Mr. Doolittle?
Mr. Chair, if I may, so I'm still committed to trying to figure out, to try to collect some information from executive staff and from our Traffic Safety Bureau to share with the committee. We were supposed to have a district engineers meeting this past Tuesday, and ultimately it was canceled. But I'll do what I can to have some information prepared about the process, at least internally to the district. I don't have any authority, I don't have any say-so in that, but I want to try to get some information so that we can try to figure out what the process is. As I shared with you, and just so the rest of the committee knows, I sit next to the district engineer for TxDOT for the El Paso MPO. And last month's meeting, he was sitting next to me and he showed me his computer. And every day he gets an update on the number of fatalities on Texas routes. Every morning, he gets an update on COVID numbers within the DOT, those kinds of things. So that brought to question also, why is our process so slow? And I don't know if it's the agreement, the contract. Maybe it's because it's UNM and not NMSU. I don't know. They're a little slower than us Aggie alumni. I don't know, Mr. Chair, but I'll do what I can to try to have some discussion topics. But as I shared with you and I shared with Andrew this morning, if we move forward with voting, I may abstain. I need to be careful that I don't bypass any kind of our processes, but I certainly want to share information with you all so we can make a knowledgeable resolution and move forward. The other comment that I also have that I shared briefly with Andrew is I think that there needs to be some discussion between the other MPOs to see what their thoughts are. I think collectively it would be important to approach the department as a whole. But that's my commitment, Mr. Chair. I'll see what I can get before we have our next meeting.
I appreciate that, Mr. Doolittle. Councilor Bencomo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Doolittle. I'm glad you brought that up. I think I completely agree with you. And if it's an administrative ask, then, we would appreciate some of that information about how that process can be changed. But if it ends up being legislative, one of our own Southern New Mexico representatives chairs the Transportation Committee at the state level. So I think she'd be a good person. Representative Rubio would be a great person to reach out to about this and have those conversations. But I'm glad you brought that up. I fully support some sort of resolution out of this body and whatever advocacy we can do.
Thank you, Councilor. And I know it's, and we have a resolution, particularly with the MPO. I know it's not necessarily binding for specific jurisdictions, but at least I think it starts that conversation saying, the three jurisdictions that make up the Mesilla Valley MPO at least agree with the direction on where we want to go. And Mr. Doolittle, I will say that I will be joining you on the El Paso MPO, as I'll be the Doña Ana County representative on the MPO for the El Paso LPO. So.
Mr. Chair, you don't recognize what you're in for.
Okay, are there any other board comments?
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
on this topic, I have a comment and a couple questions that I need some clarity on before I can administratively move forward on crafting this. The first is a statement. I did speak with the liaisons from NMDOT, as I suspected and conveyed to you in December last month. I personally, nor are any members of staff allowed to directly communicate or interface with state legislators on any matter whatsoever. So if this is a conversation, as I suspect it will be, just editorializing, being honest, this is going to be a legislative endeavor, partially. MPO staff is not going to be able to be of direct support. We will support you in your role as MPO policy members, but we will not be able to directly interface or do any kind of direct liaising ourselves. That is completely off the table. The first of the two questions that I have is first, who would this resolution be aimed at? Because I'm obviously going to have to write this, so I'm going to need some parameters within which to operate. So would this be a resolution that is aimed at our member jurisdictions governing bodies, or is this a resolution that is aimed at the state legislature, or is this a resolution that would be aimed at both, asking the member jurisdictions to do some kind of resolution of support of the MPO's initiative, or what are the parameters of this resolution?
My initial thought would be that it would be a twofold. One, I would love to see it targeted towards the local jurisdictions and members of this body, so that not just the members that are here on the committee understand and are educated about it, but I would like each of our member jurisdictions to understand exactly what's going on, so that then the more that are educated about it, we can start to raise the awareness and hopefully push that, the need for this. So that's, I'd say, one. The second would be, and this would, I think, come from, hopefully, at least maybe between now and the next meeting, maybe from input from Mr. Doolittle. I would like to see the legislators and DOT be notified or aware of the outcome of this request. Because if the DOT understands this is what we're looking for, but our legislators can be advocates for us within this local area. And it may be, like you said, you may not be able to send it directly or interface with that, but even myself as the chair would be glad to send it to our legislators if we have this under consideration and approval. But that would be the second piece of it, is from the state level, I would look the DOT and the local legislators so that they understand that this is what we're looking at here locally.
And Mr. Chair, I guess,
Chair?
Councilor Mpo?
I just have a quick question regarding, who's the decision maker about how the data is distributed?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Bencomo, that's actually, in a way, one of the things that Mr. Doolittle is trying to figure out. I don't know, most of you were on the committee in 2019, the last time I actually sort of went on a little expedition to try to make some improvements in this specific area. And that was not an area that I was I've made no progress, I'll be honest. I succeeded in no way in this endeavor, other than making some noise. But this was one of the things that became apparent to me, is that whatever it is that's going on, it's very deeply entrenched. It's the way that things have always been. But it's also a very, kind of what Mr. Cabello was talking about, it's a very obscure process. People who are on the outside of this process, it's just something that happens in the background. The data appears late, in my editorial opinion, but the data appears, people don't really question how is it generated, where does it come from. And I know that there is a contract between NMDOT and UNM about how this is handled. What the specific contents of that contract are, I have no idea. I believe that the individual, Mr. Franklin, what was the name of the guy that was, because I don't believe it was the same guy in 2019 that I was interfacing with, because I believe that was a Dr. Muhammad something.
Mr. Chair, Andrew, so it is Franklin Garcia.
Franklin Garcia.
I just sent him an email asking him to give me a call to have that conversation, but he is our Traffic Safety Bureau.
I don't believe he was the same guy that I was working with on this topic, and he may have been, my memory might be faulty, but it seems to me like there was somebody else that I was talking to. So it's obscure how this process goes, and I think never attribute to malice what can be explained by inertia to some extent. And I think it's on the part of all the actors here. I think it's probably a lot of it is just this is the way it's always been, and there's not been a whole lot of thought about how to change it. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to rattle some cages and make some changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, as I think about, so I understand that U.S. staff are not able to do advocacy, right? But I'm assuming that this governing body is. So I would say that it would be in our best interest to just go to the source directly and potentially, Mr. Chair, even organize the other MPOs around the state around this similar and really start shaking some trees or whatever you just said, Andrew. But
Cages.
Because I just feel like if we spend more time within our own governing bodies, I just feel like this NPO could really take the lead on starting this conversation statewide and go directly to the decision maker.
And I do want to add one point of clarity. We as staff, if there is a resolution that is passed that requires us to submit it to the state legislature, we can do that. But at that point, that would be where the end of our particular ability to engage. You as elected officials, both on behalf of the MPO, but also in your jurisdictional capacity, you can totally speak to legislatures. That's part of your job, part of your portfolio. It's just, we would be able to submit the resolution. I don't know exactly the mechanics of how that would get done. I would have to educate myself on that, but there's got to be a way. But at that point, then staff's process, and that would end, at least on that end of it, would obviously continue to be engaged on the DOT and on the MPO level.
Yeah. And, I think, Councilman Bencomo, I think that's exactly the point, is that I think too often, especially down here, down south, they don't hear us too often in Santa Fe. So it's just, I want to see if we can find a way to make some noise, absolutely make, if we can take the lead and maybe get other MPOs along the way to join in, that'd be great. And and hopefully, Trent, you don't mind me sharing this little story from the discussion we had, where over at that interchange with New Mexico 404, and I'm trying to remember, War Road or whatever in Chaparral, where you had an accident that took out the light post. And now you're waiting on the control box, excuse me, there's a control box. And I know you know the data is there that says there's more accidents, but in order for the state to see it, it's going to take 2 years for them to realize there's more accidents in that intersection when we know it's happening right now. And so there's no way, and I think if I understood it right, because that data doesn't exist in the state's vault in their database, they're not able to expedite that control box. So we're on a regular time frame, which I believe, Trent, you had said was 9 months because of the delays in supply chain, so in the meantime, it just happened that I had a conversation with somebody who drives that road but 2 days later, and they made a comment that they see the sign that indicates that it's coming up, the notification sign that was put out by DOT so that people were aware that, because in the night, it's very dark, they don't see the roundabout that's coming up, and so that leads to more accidents. And so that they were wondering why that was done. And it's something as simple as the fact that they can't get what they need in a timely or in a quick, they can't expedite. And so that's just an example of the effect that we see in real time within our communities that this could potentially have. But, go ahead.
And Mr. Chair, if I can, just a couple of things. So the other example that I've used is, the I-25 University project. The biggest factor for moving forward with that project was the southbound off-ramp for the NMSU students and the Centennial kids. It was the safety issue of it backing up. And it's going to be 2 years for us to know if those roundabouts are successful, if those kinds of things, if we've minimized accidents. So it is real time. The other thing that I would share with this committee is just keep in mind that UNM is responsible for analyzing and collecting police reports statewide. So it's important that we do work with our municipalities and counties, because if they're not filling out the police reports correctly, if we're using different forms, if they're doing some of those things, that is a delay in the data, because you can't appropriately analyze, cause and those kinds of things. So it's going to be more than a DOT issue. It's going to be more than our elected officials. There's going to be some law enforcement input. It's going to be a long endeavor, but I think it's important for us to at least shorten that timeline so we'll know if our projects are a success or a failure, especially on the safety aspect.
Thank you, appreciate that, and I appreciate you letting me share this story, because I think very often NMDOT, you guys get the complaints, but you're doing a remarkable job, and I appreciate you being an advocate for us here on the MPO and in our communities. Trent.
Mr. Chair, then I guess if this is a pause in the conversation for kind of me to shift, I do want to follow up on something Mr. Doolittle said. I did have a tentative conversation about this topic with our DOT liaison, Ms. Debbie Hudson, and exactly what Mr. Doolittle said, she also said to me about as far as the statewide system, the track system. And this kind of shocked me, because based on what I had heard in 2019, I thought that all of the municipalities in the state were using it. Apparently, according to Ms. Hudson's statement last week, that's not the case, that there are still municipalities, there's still jurisdictions, I don't know if any of the counties still are, but municipalities that are still submitting paper reports to the state. So that, to me, this is really kind of turned into a bit of a brainstorming session here, but to me, that would be, I think, a target for a legislative allocation that could be targeted to those municipalities to bring them up to speed so that everybody if nothing else, is at least on a level playing field with regards to crash reporting and submission of the crash data. But I do want to also follow up on what Mr. Doodle said, just to kind of make sure everyone's kind of prepared for this. This process is not going to be easy. This is going to take a while, and at some point, we're going to encounter resistance on this. So I just want to make sure everyone's kind of braced for that, bared down, ready to go for this, because this is going to be a bit of a long haul for this committee if we want to move this forward. I certainly hope that this will. This is something that's clearly beyond me, because I tried. So with that, I just want to make sure that I understand the will of the committee correctly. I will write the resolution draft to be targeted both to the legislature and to the three political jurisdictions here in our area. But my follow-up question is, do you want this to be an action item at the February meeting, or do you want this to be a discussion item? So I guess the question is, how comfortable would the committee be potentially with having to do some extensive wordsmithing if what I write turns out to be terrible? Good. At the February meeting, or if you want to have a dialogue and a discussion item at February and then bring it for action at the April meeting. I know that would introduce a delay, but I want to make sure that we get a quality resolution at the end of this process.
My initial thought would be, I would love to see it as an action item, because if we don't, like you said, we don't have a meeting in March, so we'll be pushing it back a couple months to April, but that's my thought. I don't know if anybody else has any type of strong feelings otherwise of what.
No, thank you, Commissioner, or Counselor. I swear the titles, they must not start with the same letter. You may need to fix that. And those were my concerns, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. All right, back to the committee members' updates. Are there any other updates, comments from the committee? All right, so we'll kick it over to MPO staff updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have 3 items that I need to update the committee on. The first is, I am very pleased to announce, contrary to my expectation, the state of New Mexico has approved our JPA. So, Mr. Chair, we are in fact now a board. We are operating under the new JPA. I only found out this morning, so that's why none of the documentation reflects that. But the new JPA is the one that is now currently in force. We have now a deadline of November of 2026 by which the JPA must now be reviewed. I will now embarrass her by pointing her out, but we do have the city clerk, Ms. Christine Rivera, here with us today. We are working with the city clerk's office. They will be the ones who will be monitoring that hourglass for us, because I don't know who may or may not be here, but they have processes in place via which that kind of item can be monitored. So we will be working with the city. So in case we are literally all gone, we will be able to maintain our federal compliance as far as keeping up our JPA and keeping it updated. So congratulations to everyone. This was 2.5 years worth of work getting this done. Also, since he's here, I'll embarrass him, but Mr. Cabello was also a big help in getting the JPA done on the city end, so we definitely appreciate that. So moving on from that item, follow up from that, this does accelerate, since I was not expecting to hear about this until May. This does accelerate the need for getting the bylaws process underway. So I don't know if we'll be able to do it in February. Based on not only the discussion here, but also on another couple other things that I know are probably coming up. I'm anticipating the February agenda is going to be pretty heavy. So we may not talk about this until April, but we are going to need to start work on bylaws review and revision, because our bylaws that we now have standing are now grossly out of date and don't reflect the reality on the ground on pretty much any front. So if the agenda next month is light, we'll have it as a discussion item, but if it's heavy, then I will push that to April. But we will have a pretty intensive bylaws process coming up this year. The next item I want to update everyone on is...
Hold on, Andrew.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Andrew, I just have a quick question on that, and I don't know if it's for you or for the chair. Are we going to do that as a I guess I can call it board now. Are we going to do that as a board, or do you suspect that we'll do a subcommittee kind of like we did with the JPA?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Doodle, that's an excellent question, and I had actually already spoken with Mr. Chair about this specific topic, just kind of on a brainstorming level. It will need the authorization of the policy board as to how it gets handled, but our initial thought was that we would create a subcommittee, not just of this committee, but also of the advisory committees, because obviously the bylaws touch them as well, and they're going to need to have an opportunity for input. But that's a tentative suggestion that I will go into in more detail when we have the discussion item, either next month or in April.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Were there any other questions about the bylaws process before I move on? Okay, moving on, as most everyone here is going to be aware, we do have a vacancy on Mpo staff right now. I actually just found out today we did experience a little bit of a setback on that, but I hope that it will not be too substantive, and I do hope that we will be whole again by the February Policy Committee meeting, or at least be well on our way to getting the new person on board. So. And then lastly, in addition to the funding that Mr. Doodle spoke about, we do have the Transportation Project Fund funding that is coming up. We don't know, it's another one we don't know until the legislature meets and approves the bill. We don't know how much money that's going to be, but we mentioned this at TAC last Thursday to the jurisdictions. I'll mention it to you on the political level. Please do be working with your staffs if you have projects. Now is the time to be thinking about those rather than when the call for projects comes out, because I do not know how long the call for projects will be. This is a short legislative session this year, so I hope it will be longer than last year's, but there's no guarantee of that. Last year, we only had a month, and historically, they have been very short, and that's kind of been a difficulty. So please be thinking about that now with your staffs, and that concludes staff comments, so I'll stand now for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Ray? Okay. All right, so looks like we'll close it up with our public comment. Mr. Pearson.
George Pearson. Thank you, board members. I was really encouraged by your discussion. I was going to come up here the second time, but your discussion on looking at the fatality reports and the delays, that's something that in our committee we had frustrations with as we were looking at the safety reports. Another item that we looked at was the uniform crash report and the need for that, any changes that need to be made in that. So that goes hands in hand, because that's the data that goes in to generate the fatality reports. The one item that I remember kind of offhand, I don't remember the exact numbers, but for cause of crashes, unknown was a very high percentage on the uniform crash report. It was like 20% or something. So I don't know if that's a fault with the way the reports are being filled out, training, the issues with using paper reports instead of a uniform software that requires filling out certain things. But that's another area that I hope you'll look at the same time that you look at the fatality reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Okay. Well, all right. I think we've reached the end of our agenda. So if we can have a motion to adjourn and a second.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Barraza. Thank you, Vice Chair. If there's no objections, then we'll call this meeting adjourned at 2:24 p.m. Thank you.